saving people, reviewing things, the family business. Let's talk about Supernatural.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, today we're going to be doing Have You Seen?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week, we are talking about the pilot episode of the 2005 supernatural horror series Supernatural, which is one of my favorite shows of all time, and definitely, in my opinion, the best urban fantasy show that has pretty much ever been made. I've yet to find something that holds up better and has a consistently higher quality than Supernatural. So that is why I wanted to kind of introduce this to you and get your opinion on this. So you've never seen an episode of Supernatural before, right?
No.
Had you ever heard about Sam and Dean Winchester? Had you ever seen the memes? Have you ever seen any references to it?
Winchester, isn't that in Wednesday? People are going to probably kill me for that, but that is in Winchester, is a Wednesday. But besides that, no.
So Winchester is a reference to the Winchester rifle, which is a famous rifle like from the 1800s. These characters have not crossed over. I think there was like a Scooby-Doo crossover at one point. No, but like these are original characters. But the reason I'm mentioning the memes is that this show is huge in like fandom. Like this has a massive fan base. Depending on which corners of the internet you hang out at, you might see like memes involving the Winchesters and other characters from the show. But you went into this completely blind. You'd never heard of this before. Maybe I've mentioned it once or twice, but you were not familiar with this show, with the characters, with the story, right?
No.
So just to very briefly recap, so Supernatural is a urban fantasy show from 2005, which follows the adventures of Sam and Dean Winchester, who are brothers who are monster hunters. And they drive around America in their car, which is a major character in the story as well. And they essentially drive into small towns and solve supernatural cases, hauntings, poltergeists, various creatures, witches. There are 15 seasons of this. And throughout these 15 seasons, they encounter just about every kind of urban legend, folklore, mythological creature, fantasy creature. And they fight the monster of the week for the most part. But there's a main story to this that covers the first 5 seasons that ends with them defeating Lucifer, just as a spoiler. So that was kind of the story that was planned from the beginning. And that was so successful and so popular that they got 10 more seasons. So there's kind of 2 eras in Supernatural. First is the main 5 seasons. At least that's how I think of it. You've got the first 5 seasons, which are kind of the core story. And then 10 more seasons of more Winchester adventures. And those are very mixed. Like there are some amazing episodes in those 10 seasons, and there's also a lot of fluff. So if anybody after this conversation wants to check out Supernatural, I would start with the first 5 seasons as the main story, and then it's a 10-season encore. So having said all of that, in the pilot, you've got these 2 brothers, Sam and Dean. We see in the first scene that their mother died under mysterious circumstances. She essentially burst into flames and died, and their father saved both of them. Fast forward 20 years, Sam is about to enter into law school. He's moved on with his life, and then Dean shows up and says, Dad's been on a hunting trip and he's not come back for a few days, meaning he's been out hunting monsters and he's gone out of contact with Dean, and now they have to go on an adventure to find their father and potentially rescue him from whatever has gotten to him. And over the course of that, they kind of follow clues that he left behind. And this leads them to a small town in which people are kind of disappearing, and it turns out that there is a ghost that is based on the story of the woman in white, which we'll go into. That ghost is essentially killing people on the space, essentially pretending to be a hitchhiker and then killing its victims. And Sam and Dean then decide to go after this ghost, kind of while they're looking for the next clue of where their father might be. So it's essentially kind of the plot of the pilot episode that introduces us to the main characters, to kind of the main atmosphere and tropes of the show. So watching this for the first time in 2025, what was your main impression of the pilot of Supernatural?
Before I give you my main impression, you said that so for 5 years, 5 seasons, is connected to that one storyline. And is that one storyline still about finding his father, or was it mainly ending in obviously defeating Lucifer?
So they find the father after less than the 5 seasons. And
okay, cool.
that then leads into like the reason for why the
I don't want
father
another
has
reason in case.
no, just very generally, the father was hunting a particular creature, and and the identity of that creature leads into the plot that then leads to them fighting Lucifer.
Okay.
So this is kind of the inciting like the dad disappearing is the inciting incident, and when they find him, the story kind of snowballs from there.
Okay.
This is not 5 years of them looking for the father, and there's
Okay.
never like the status quo actually changes quite drastically over the show several times, and it does not take 5 years for them. This is not How I Met Your Mother, where it's just stringing you along for 10 seasons, and then in the last episode you find out who it is, and then it's not that great. The father is actually a major character in the story going forward.
But that was always gonna end up anticlimactic. I found it impossible. Even though there were episodes which we were enjoying for How I Met Your Mother, it was always gonna end anticlimactic. But this is not an epic. This is not a discussion on How I Met Your Mother. Back to Supernatural. What I can say about the pilot is I see potential. However, I wasn't fully engaged in it yet, but I definitely did give it grace because it was the pilot, and it was a pilot which had its moments. And I said and when I was looking at the broader picture of things, I said one of the things I actually liked about it was, I can see that it's going to be a journey, which is going to be to find his father. And I didn't know how long that journey was going to last for because I saw how many seasons there was, and I said, surely this can't last for 15 seasons. So that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, how long is that gonna, how long it was gonna take? So thank you for clearing that up. But I like the idea of where, that each episode isn't just, each week is just going to be a different monster, and you get what I'm saying, and case closed. I didn't want it to be kind of like that, even though it wasn't going to be like that, but I just enjoyed that the end goal and like the kind of like the main story, the main plot of it is to, finding their dad pretty much. So I feel like it's going to come together very well. Obviously it makes sense, fighting different monsters, which obviously provides the entertainment, obviously, wow, with the purpose of finding the father. So just how they entwine, I can definitely see it being very interesting. However, like I said, I wasn't fully engaged yet. With a lot of TV series, especially like the ones back in the day, I always kind of like feel like the acting can kind of not really feel too authentic, but I give that grace also. I don't know why, but I just give it grace, especially if it was back in the day, and it always does end up becoming better. But I think there's just like a specific to like TV tone when it comes to a lot of these series, which is like, this is pretty much what you're going to get. It's very rare where you'll see where the acting will feel pretty much authentic. So that's something which it bothered me, but not too much. However, yeah, so overall, I will say I wasn't fully engaged, but it had its moments, and I can see the broader picture, and I can definitely see it becoming better in terms of how I'm taking it in.
To touch on the this thing about it's not just a monster of the week. First of all, watching this, I was really reminded of how good episodic television can be, because this is not an 8-hour movie, right? Like, this is like not the entire season. I think there's 15 episodes in the first season, something like that, and then after that it's 22 episodes, and that's not like one continuous story the way you get it in current shows, like shows made in the last 10 years. This is very much episodic, and I really enjoy that. You can get a complete story in 40 minutes, and they're all similar in style, and they have the same characters and all of that, so it's part of the same thing, but it's not as exhausting as here's 27 episodes and you have to watch them in sequence, and they're all just stringing you along until the final payoff, right? So I was watching this again, I was reminded of how good episodic television can be. But it's not just episodic, because this started in 2005, and around the late 90s to mid 2000s or so was kind of the beginning of the time when episodic television was being phased out and story arcs really became prominent. And this is like a hybrid, one of those hybrids that came out during that decade, where most episodes are episodic, but they will often add to the main story, and then the beginning and end of the season, as well as a couple of episodes during the season, will feature into the main story, right? And here that is tracking down the father and understand, like, figuring out what he has been hunting, and what happened to him and how to help him. I watched a couple of episodes today, and in most episodes there's at least one building block that adds to the big puzzle, which then all get paid off the next time the main story moves forward. So it's a hybrid, but you can just pick up an episode, invest 40 minutes, watch it over dinner or whatever, and you got a story out of it, like a complete case that is satisfying. So I will die on that hill. I think episodic television is the superior, like, that's what the medium is good at. Like, if you're telling one big continuous story, then you should maybe make a movie or something. But like I think television or serialized storytelling is better with mostly self-contained stories, in my opinion. Second thing about those two characters. So I take it you didn't really care for Sam and Dean.
I don't want to say yes, because I was intrigued to see where their relationship will go, because they've got a brotherhood 100%, but you can see that there's trouble. There's there's underlying trouble that needs to be kind of like resolved and kind of like go through. Like they're gonna have to face their past and face, their past issues in order to move forward. And that's what was interesting. Their interaction wasn't bad at all, but like I said, it just felt like, I don't want to say old TV, because there are old TV shows which the acting is really good, but it felt generic old TV acting, and that's why I found it a bit hard to kind of just engage myself with their relationship, because it felt like they were just reading scripts. They were reading lines from a script when they were talking to, like, when they were communicating with each other. That's why with me it's important, like when I'm watching TV, movies, whatever, one of the main things, I don't care if the budget looks non-existent. I'm not going to say I don't care if the quality's dead, but I give it grace. I'll give it grace if the acting is amazing. If the acting is amazing, for me, amazing acting is just believable. Like, it just has to feel authentic. That's kind of where my interest, I didn't lose interest, but it was just kind of hard to, like I said, engage and just enjoy what I was watching with, whenever I saw them on screen. Well, they're on screen pretty much most of the whole episode, but I'm assuming it gets better. I'm hoping it gets better. Do you know what I'm saying? So
it really does.
So they had their moments and it was enjoyable. Like there were times where, I could see like the comedic value in their relationship as well, which added to the seriousness of things. And it was a good blend. So I definitely, like I said, when I say moments, it wasn't moments as in like specific scenes, but just moments like of good things that I could see. And I'm hoping that they implement in later episodes.
So it takes them about 2 or 3 episodes to really get into the groove. And once they do, they're amazing. So they really start embodying. I think I don't know the entire filmography of these two actors. I think in 2005 they were nobodies. Like they had been on a few like shows, but they were not like big actors, right? And so they kind of got this lucky break with this show where they kind of play relatively simple characters, right? Like as I rewatched the pilot, I kind of timed it, and we get everything you need to know in the first 8 minutes. We learn the nature of the conflict, which is Sam is all about escaping his family and living life on his own terms and being free of obligation so that he can pursue the life he wants to live. And Dean is very much the good soldier. He follows in his father's footsteps. He thinks family is everything. He believes that when their father gives them an order, they need to do it because it's the right thing to do and because that's their obligation. And so that is why Sam essentially ran away from home or turned his back on his family as soon as he was old enough. And that is why Dean has turned into a monster hunter and has been hunting with his father this entire time. And the conflict is Sam does not want anything to do with this at all, but now that his father is missing, he has an obligation to help on the condition that it's just a one-time thing and it's just a weekend, and then when they're done he can go back to his life and go to his law school interview and all of that, right? So that is kind of the basic nature of their disagreement and of their conflict and their basic character traits, right? Like Dean is the more outgoing, the more live today to its fullest kind of guy, and Sam is the plan for the future, be methodical, don't take risks, don't do anything stupid, think about the future kind of guy, right? We get all of this in the first 8 minutes. That's not the entirety of the characterization, but it's the foundation of it. And once you know that, if you paid attention in the first 8 minutes, you know what you need to know about Sam and Dean Winchester. And then everything that comes after builds on that foundation. And actually, they do something really cool in the first 5 seasons where they flip towards the end, where Dean is kind of disillusioned and says he just wants to live his life and get away. And Sam is the one who feels a sense of obligation to the job, basically. But it's not random. They don't simply flip. It takes them several seasons to make this transition, and they have experiences that explain why they flip this way. And so over those 5 seasons, there's a really compelling character arc where they end up in opposite places, which I always like symmetry in writing. And this is like one of those things where they start off in 2 places, and by the end they have switched but it's not simply author fiat. There's actually a story reason for it. And so these actors, essentially, what I was trying to get at earlier is they kind of lucked into this role, like with these relatively simple characters. And then the show was a massive breakout hit, and they got steady work for 15 years. And they really made those characters their own, and they really embodied it. And the fandom is very much based on Sam and Dean as characters. Like, they really carried the show. And personally, I'm into the folklore, I'm into the urban legends, I'm into the monster hunting. But most of the fans of the show are really into Sam and Dean as people, and they're suffering, and they make all these sacrifices and take all these risks, and they save each other several times over as they go through these various challenges. And that is just a really compelling journey. And by the end of it, they've gone through hell for each other, right? And the pilot gives you a very solid foundation. Like, they don't retcon much of anything. These are the characters, and then they develop going forward.
Two things. The first thing was, I'm assuming, which I picked up definitely from the first 8 minutes point that you made. Well, I didn't pick up that they're going to switch kind of roles in terms of Dean becoming Sam and Sam becoming Dean, is what I'm trying to say. So I didn't really see that. No, it's not that. I didn't see that coming.
It's not foreshadowed in the pilot at all. I'm just saying, if you were to go on watching this, you could look forward to these kinds of character arcs where this disagreement that gets established in the first 8 minutes is the foundation for everything that comes after. And you get that kind of character growth and development. Like, these are not the same characters by the end compared to where they started, but each individual step is understandable.
But I was going to say, with Dean, it would have made it, I think it does make sense. That, just in general, that makes sense because obviously with Dean's girlfriend dying, set that foundation as well in terms of, okay, now he's got an obligation to the cause. And with Sam, even though it wasn't said, it does feel like his obligation wasn't an obligation which he wanted. It was because obviously it was put upon him, because there was multiple times, there was like scenes where Sam was saying, I think there was a scene where Sam was saying we didn't have a normal upbringing. Their father trained them to be like freaking hunters, pretty much, is what he was saying. So it definitely does kind of, it told me that I'm sure there's going to be a change in Sam where he's finally going to choose what he wants to do, if this is something that he wants to do. And I'm not surprised that he ends up kind of like switching because of what I saw in the first episode, and obviously with their conversation, they told me that, okay, this is kind of like forced upon Sam and he's got an obligation. Because I remember when his father passed on, obviously in the first 8 minutes where obviously the mom died, the house came on fire, but obviously the dad gave Dean to Sam, obviously when they were kids. So from there, that told me that even though he's older, so it makes sense, but still, that told me that it made sense why he kind of has like that obligation to continue what they're doing to become a hunter. So that was the first thing. The second thing was, I'm assuming the reason why people really like the brotherhood between Sam and Dean is because I'm sure, it's not even I'm sure, I know for a fact the mythology around angels, demons, heaven and hell is obviously going to be shown throughout the whole series. But I'm assuming the reason
you have no idea.
Well, I'm assuming the reason, and like the main, I'm guessing the main reason why people really, really like what they're seeing, especially with the relationship between Sam and Dean, is because I'm guessing the way that they're hunting down these things is not done the typical way. I'm guessing like they make their own rules on how to kill them. Because what I'm trying to like say is, because usually, when you're encountering and you're fighting against demons, angels, and stuff, you use religious weapons such as the cross, holy war, and stuff. But I didn't see that in episode 1. When I was watching, I was like, okay, that's interesting. I didn't really. They've mentioned that they've got, like, when Dean got arrested, the police officer mentioned that they've got weapons and stuff. I don't know if it's religious weapon, but they mentioned they got weapon, like, some supernatural stuff.
Once we move past the pilot itself, I do want to talk a little bit more about the plot of the pilot itself, but I do have like a couple of pillars of what a supernatural episode is made of. And this whole thing about fighting monsters with knowledge is like one of them. And just to give you an idea, like I think the 3rd episode or 4th, they do an exorcism on a plane. So there's like a demon that kind of possesses people who are about to go on planes and then crashes the planes on purpose. I think that's episode 4.
Wait, how do they do the exorcism though? Do they actually use a Bible or?
Yeah, with like a Latin prayer. Yeah. So they do go to religious places. Like they are like Sam and Dean are not specifically like not all that religious, but prayers and crucifixes and holy water work against specific monsters. Not all of them, but some of them. So that is something that comes in. And later on in the show, like angels start making an appearance as well. One of the most beloved characters is the Archangel Castiel, who essentially gets kicked out of heaven and has to kind of redeem himself, and he does so by helping the Winchesters. Essentially, that's like a plot that lasts a couple of seasons. So, but before we move on to kind of like the bigger picture of what works about Supernatural, what did you think about the rest of like after Sam and Dean decide to go out, track down their father, and we go into this little town? So a big pillar of Supernatural is that they drive around in this car, in this Impala, like listening to metal music. Like that's a big part of the feel of the show. When the show was developed, a big influence was westerns, because in a typical western, like the gunslinger comes into town, there's some kind of injustice or problem going on, and he solves it, and then at the end of the story, he rides off into the sunset. And this is the structure of Supernatural, right? They drive into a town, they encounter a haunting or a monster or something, they fight it, and then they drive off to the next town at the end of the episode. So that's kind of the basic story of it. And that is what we get here, right? They find evidence that people have gone missing in this small town, and they start investigating, and they start finding evidence that there's a ghost killing people, and they find the motel room where their father stayed, and they find kind of the evidence that he accumulated, and that makes reference to the woman in white. So did you know the story about the woman in white?
I definitely had references about the woman in white, but I don't know the story.
This is actually a combination of two different stories. One of them is the ghost hitchhiker, and the other one is the story of La Llorona, which is a Mexican folklore story about a ghost of a woman who killed her children because she was jealous after discovering that her husband was unfaithful. So it's kind of combining these two stories. And the twist is that this woman, like this ghost, believes that all men are perpetrators, and therefore all are legitimate targets, and therefore there's never an end to her mission, and therefore she can never come to rest. And there's also a thing about her having killed her children kind of in her anger, and that is also why she can't come to rest. So what did you think of that story? Was that engaging? Was that interesting? Was that well done?
It was interesting until it got to the point where she went after Dean. That's because obviously now what you're saying is kind of provided insight. Because when I first saw it, I was thinking, okay, this is pretty cool. I like it. But then when it got to Dean, I said, okay, wait, now this kind of, I wouldn't say, I thought it was a cop-out. So I thought, okay, now they're just kind of like making stuff up, because the role of this ghost demon, whatever, that's going after all these men is infidelity, or like you say, doing wrongs to women. But Dean didn't do anything. So then that's when I was like, okay, why is she going after Dean? And then when she said the line, well, you will eventually, that's like, oh, okay. So in my head, I thought, oh, this is just a cop-out. Like, because, do you know what I'm saying? You didn't follow the rules that were set before, and now you just kind of changed it to fit in well with the storyline, if that makes sense. So that's what I thought before. But now, obviously, with what you're saying, I don't think it's a cop-out. But to ask you, so to you didn't see it as a cop-out, because technically I'm still 50-50, because you set a rule, right? So the rule was she goes after men that are, that do women wrong, and then all of a sudden now you're kind of like changing that, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Because you're changing the rule.
It's interesting that you viewed it as a cop-out, because I viewed it as a twist. And I guess there's a kind of a fine line between those two. I guess it has to do with bringing the story towards Sam and Dean, because neither of them have cheated on anybody. None of them are legitimate targets. So by making themselves bait, like the reason it works is because this ghost believes that all men are cheaters, right? I view it as a twist. I view it as a variation of the story. And that makes it kind of even more tragic, because like I said, there will never be rest for her, right? Like she will never run out of targets. She will never have justice, right? Because she's not targeting somebody specific. She's just targeting everybody. And that means she will go through this cycle forever. And that is why I think it works for me. So you're basically saying it didn't really work for you, right?
I wouldn't say it didn't work for me. Because if we saw this in any other movie, I'm pretty sure where, like, let's say, for example, you set something and then all of a sudden it just changes at the end because it fits well, I'm sure we would complain. So that's why with this one, it's like I said, it didn't ruin the movie. It didn't ruin nothing for me at all. It was just, there was a rule that was set and then it was just changed at the end. And you're saying there was a twist, which I can accept. So like I said, I can accept that, but I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, if this was any other movie and we saw that, or anything else and we saw that and we weren't really having a good time, but we saw there was a rule set and then all of a sudden it changes at the end. Her reasoning was, well, all men would cheat anyways. So you will cheat eventually, is what you're saying. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's at the end of the episode. If it was halfway, that's different. If it was halfway, I'm like, okay, cool, we're learning more about the ghost. But it wasn't. It was at the end when the story has to end and, the ghost has to lose. So I was like, oh, okay.
I see what you're saying. And I think in many cases, I would agree with you. I think the reason it works for me here is number one, it doesn't really change the fundamental story of it, right? They're still going to defeat the ghost, which they would have done anyway. The mystery is in finding her and understanding what's going on in the first place, and they've done that. And it also is like the tragedy of it is that this ghost is kind of exists in this perpetual state of anger and rage and mourning, and her target is Sam, who is the nicest guy ever, and whose entire motivation is finding justice for his girlfriend. Right, like his entire like the reason. I believe it was Sam, yeah, and then Dean comes to rescue him essentially. So Sam is the bait, and then Dean kind of catches up with him, and Sam is the one guy. Like if there's any guy where this accusation is not correct, it's Sam. Like he's devoted to his girlfriend. He's basically, he feels bad about going on the trip in the first place, and then he's devastated when she dies at the end. Which actually, no, this has not happened yet, right? But he's like his entire motive is to get back to her so that they can have a life together. There's nobody who's a worse target for this ghost, right? This tragic existence of empty rage, essentially, that is not aimed at anyone in particular and is aimed at the wrong person in the end. I think that's kind of what works. But I do agree with you that if a movie or if a story establishes rules, it should keep that. But I feel like we didn't really break the rules because the motivation of the ghost is still the same, right? Go after the men who have wronged her or have wronged other women. She just has a twisted perspective on what that means. Like it's not really breaking the rule, it's like amending it, or it's like adding a detail to it. I think that's why I'm okay with it. But this is also by no means the best story in this series. Like there are other ghost stories, and like there are many episodes that deal with ghosts, and I think there are many that are better. And I think the entire purpose of the pilot is just to set up the characters, set up the world, be an on-ramp into the adventures of Sam and Dean. And I think it does that, and that is why I'm not mad at it. Like it does, it's not nonsensical. Like the twist makes sense is the other thing. So that's kind of why I am okay with it. But I can kind of see why somebody would say, wait, this is not what we were told previously, right?
Just not about this, but just on the topic of twists. The twist at the end, his girlfriend dying the same way his mother died, was interesting. And what also was interesting, like when I saw that scene, for some reason it brought me back to the demon, I believe it was a demon, ghost or something, that was standing in Sam's room when he was a baby. Obviously, when the mum came in, thought it was the dad, then went downstairs, and the dad was actually downstairs. When I saw his girlfriend die the same way that the mother died, it just brought me back to that. I'm like, okay, then maybe it's like, is Sam cursed in a way? Like, is he cursed?
Do you want to know?
Just ask that question. No, I don't want to know.
Because this is actually the story of the first major story arc. But if you don't want to know, it is not accidental. It's not laziness that let the mother and the girlfriend die in the same way. There's a reason for that. And this stuff gets built on as early as episode 4, I think. So there is a purpose to it. There is a logic to it. And it will all make sense in the end.
Okay. Cool. That was interesting when I saw it. I said, oh, damn. Like, it just told me that this guy, it must be Sam, or there's some sort of, there is a demonic spirit that's following them. It has been following them. For what reason, I do not know, which obviously we're going to see in the series, but it was interesting. I didn't think that was going to happen, to be fair. I knew something bad was going to happen, but I didn't think the death was going to mirror the mothers. I said, okay, now there's layers to this. It seems it's going to be a very interesting journey. I'm definitely going to watch a second episode because I like I said, there were definitely a lot of moments which shows, there's a lot of potential to this series in terms of me liking it or not. So yeah, I am going to definitely watch a second episode.
And it only gets better from here. Like you said earlier, it's a little bit wooden. And if you've seen the entire show and you go back to the beginning, it takes like 2 or 3 episodes before they really start sounding like these characters. And that's kind of pretty normal for TV shows, right? Where actors need a few episodes. Like if it only takes them 2 or 3 episodes to get into their characters, that's pretty good. Some don't do it for over a season, right? So I think this is ahead of the curve in that way. All right, I think we've discussed the pilot itself. And I've got a list here of things that make Supernatural, and maybe we can go through those. So the first really big one is male relationships. So you've already met the brothers, right? And we know about the father, and we know how the sons relate to the father, right? And then we kind of get like a surrogate uncle. I'm not sure when Bobby shows up, but he's basically like a friend of the father who helps him hunt, and he kind of becomes kind of an uncle mentor figure. A lot of this show is driven by these brother and father-son relationships that I think it's actually really surprising how few shows actually deal with that, where it's actually not that common, where the story is actually about brothers and sons and fathers and stuff like that. And so, but like, this is one of the big pillars of the show. And this even goes so far as that when things start to get religious, the Christian God is an absentee father in this. The way God relates to creation in this show is like kind of an absentee father to his children from the perspective of the children, right? Like the sense of abandonment and resentment and disappointment and regret, like all of these things that go into that is recontextualized in a Christian context. Especially once angels start showing up and start talking in the same way, right? Where they say, like, we were supposed to guard creation, and now our creator's gone and or has not been seen for a while. And what are we supposed to do? And why are we being abandoned? And different characters, different angels have different reactions to being abandoned in this way. So
I see.
So that's I don't know how you would like this, but I found it really interesting.
It depends. Because wait, you say the angels are saying that God abandoned them as well?
Yeah, because within Christianity, angels are created to kind of run creation, just enforce the cosmic order, right? And the person who gave them the job just disappeared. And now they have no purpose. They have different ideas about what their job should be and how to react to that, and whether they should try to find him or whether they should just keep doing the same thing or whether they should start doing their own thing. And that mirrors like Lucifer, right? Lucifer was the angel who stopped obeying like God's will, right? Like in the Christian story, that is what Lucifer is, right? And that's the source of all evil. And now you have the people running heaven asking the same questions that Lucifer did, because there's nobody to answer their questions anymore.
So these angels are not like fallen angels; they're generally angels that are still in heaven that haven't rebelled against God, and they. Okay, and has this specific theme, or I don't think you can call it theme, but this topic, has it been resolved? Was it resolved?
It ends up being resolved. It unfolds over a couple of seasons, and it does go somewhere.
What was the reasoning? This one I don't mind the spoiler for.
The focus is on kind of a civil war among the angels who kind of sort themselves into different camps about what to do about this abandoned creation. Like some say burn it all to the ground, create something new. Some say just keep doing the job. Some say we need to find God essentially and bring him back, right? And humans are basically like insects in that garden. But kind of that is kind of where that goes, and I file that under this whole father-son relationship, because it's kind of like the show starts with the son rebelling against the father, right? Because of the life that the father imposed on the son, in the case of Sam, right? And that is then mirrored in this religious story about a God who has disappeared and has kind of left creation to its own devices. And now the creation is starting to ask questions like, what should we be doing with our existence, right? So like that's kind of where this story goes, but it's always kind of looked at through the prism of male relationships and fathers and sons and brothers and so on. And that is kind of something that is unusual for a show. I think there's not many shows that actually go there or make that its major topic. So I found that notable, and it's one of the things that gives this show its identity.
I have to see, in terms of like my feelings towards that, I would have to see what the actual reasoning is for why or if God left them, if he left them. If it's like a proper blasphemous reason where it's like, okay, this is just BS, then I'm just gonna be like, this is BS. It's not gonna offend me because I'm like, I always see blasphemy on TV and movies and stuff. I don't really care about stuff like that. It's like my spirit's intact, so I'm cool. So it's not gonna offend me. But like I said, I either feel like it's BS, or if it's like when I say good reason, I don't mean a reason where it's something which, for example, the Christian community will be happy about. I'm like, if it's a logical reason that makes sense to the story. If it's like a reason, for example, if it's like a reason where it says God is not real, let's say the reason is no, actually you can't say that because there's angels. Let's say it's a reason where it pretty much paints God in a bad light, then I'll have an issue with that. I'll be like, oh, here we go, just another one of them ones. If it doesn't paint God in a bad light, is what I'm trying to say, then I won't have an issue with it. If it paints God in a bad light where you can feel that, there's like an undertone of disrespecting God, I'll be like, it's just it's BS. This ain't for me. Still, that storyline isn't for me. But
the thing I remember, so first of all, I didn't remember it is very blasphemous, and the thing I always remembered it was like this allegory, like this parallel to fathers and sons that is there from the very first beginning. And the points of view of the angels was always the more interesting thing. And I just looked it up, and this is kind of resolved in season 11, where God becomes disappointed with his creation and basically just leaves it to its own device and says, "You sort this out. I'm not
Yeah.
going to hold your hand anymore."
Yeah.
Like
So
angels,
even though,
demons, humans, just do your thing, and then it's your job to do the right thing, kind of thing.
okay, that's cool. Like, even though a lot of people will still say that's blasphemous, for me, I don't think a bad storyline to explore, because, like, sometimes I feel to myself, like, I can't lie. If I was God, I would just let people do what the hell they want to do because they're not listening or following to me. So I wouldn't have an issue with that whatsoever. I know some people would, because they're like, God wouldn't abandon, like, Christians be like, God wouldn't abandon his angels, though. So I get that. But for me, I'll be like, listen, this is still fiction at the end of the day. So they're just exploring. So I wouldn't take offense to that.
And I brought this
But
up
I'll be like, that
specifically
makes sense.
because I thought you would have a different perspective than I did, because to me, this is just a story. So I'm not going to be offended either way, right? This is not talking about my
Yeah.
beliefs, right? To me, this theme of absentee fathers is just something that's really central to the story from the beginning, and it kind of repeats itself once kind of the theology comes into it. It's kind of why I want to bring it up. All right, moving on to the next topic. The road trip is really important to this story. So we already talked about kind of the Western parallels where the gunslingers ride into town at the beginning and leave at the end. This car, the Impala, is really important because it represents freedom and identity and self-reliance and all of that. Dean is really in love with his car, right? It's his, like, I don't think that comes through in the pilot, but he's really into this car. He's really protective of it. The American highway specifically is a symbol of freedom, right? It's going your own way, going where you want. There being no limit to where you can go and what you can do. And this is kind of the device that kind of leads them all across the United States into these small towns where these stories are happening. It also means that they are often that they have no support. Like, they do have some allies later on in the story, but for the most part, they're on their own. It's just them, their car, and the guns in their trunk, and what they've learned. And that is how they take on the monsters. And often they are on the run from the law, right? Like, so for example, a couple of episodes into the first season, they kind of make an enemy of a shapeshifter, and the shapeshifter then commits a crime wearing Dean's face. And now the police and FBI are after Dean for having committed a murder, because the police can't account for shapeshifters, obviously. And so that is kind of them being on the run and having to be on the road and stuff like that, right? So this whole idea of the road trip, of traveling to remote places and encountering these various stories and monsters and characters is kind of another pillar of the story.
How the hell do you piss off a shapeshifter?
So basically, the shapeshifter kills somebody wearing the disguise of somebody else, and that somebody is somebody Sam knows. And so now somebody Sam knows is accused of a murder he didn't commit, and the evidence is really strong because he was on camera committing the murder and all of that, right? And so it turns out it's a shapeshifter, and when they start going after the shapeshifter retaliates by committing a crime while looking like Dean, and that puts the police on their trail. So it's stuff like this, right? So this whole idea of being on your own, being alone, being up against overwhelming odds, like almost every monster is stronger than them, and they have to figure out a way to fight it, is something that is really central in this. And the police, more often than not, being on their case is part of that, right? Because that is also an overwhelming force that they cannot outright fight, that they have to kind of outsmart, right?
The symbolism that you said about, obviously, you know, them always being on the road signifies freedom. I was just going to ask how that correlates with the story, but then you pretty much explained it when you went into it. So I was like, okay, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so initially they are looking for the father, and they're following these clues, and that leads them to these small towns where they encounter monsters, and then they fight them along the way. So that is kind of the beginning of it. But then kind of their job becomes to just travel the country and just help people. That's their family business, right? Going after these monsters and hunting them because nobody else can, right? Because the authorities are not aware of them, they can't fight them. And so if people like Sam and Dean don't come along, then nobody's going to help these people, right? Another pillar of this is the investigation. So we saw one in the pilot. This whole idea that knowledge is power and that the supernatural can be understood if you understand your history and your folklore and your theology and your occultism and all of these things. Like there's knowledge out there that tells you how these monsters work. And that knowledge is the way to winning. Humans cannot just outright take most of these creatures in a fight, but if you Like demons can be defeated with the right exorcism. Ghosts can be defeated if you can track down the bones to burn them, for example. Evil spirits can be defended against with salt, for example, right? So there are all these rules and all these weapons that exist, but you have to know it, and you have to use that knowledge effectively, and then you've got a fighting chance. And a big part of most episodes, not every episode, but most episodes, is they encounter a mysterious event and they start gathering clues, and those clues lead to more clues. And then a picture starts to form, and then there's usually a red herring that makes it look like it's one thing, but then it's actually another, and things like that, right? And this investigation is kind of the bulk of most episodes, and it brings them into the lives of these various people. And by the end of the 40 minutes, they've kind of figured out what the truth is and what they need to do. And often it's not what they thought it was. So, for example, later on, there's an episode where there's a coven of vampires, where it looks like they are killing people, and they start going after the vampires, and they start tracking them down, and then it turns out these are ethical vampires who are doing what, like, they were turned into vampires against their will, and they have a conscience, and they want to do what they can to not harm people. But there is a vampire hunter who is so traumatized by his wife being killed by vampires, I think wife and daughter, that he has kind of lost all perspective and just wants to kill and torture as many vampires as he can. And so now the vampires are the victims and the vampire hunter is the monster, for example. So that's one, and that character shows up in a few episodes. And he's a really tragic figure, and he's a really compelling character, because it's like this well-intentioned extremist kind of character where you understand where he comes from. But once you are familiar with the details of what he's doing, it's clear that he's doing the wrong thing, or he's choosing the wrong methods, for example, right? So the investigation often leads to the truth, or like if there's a haunting, oftentimes the ghost is not who you thought it was, or the ghost is actually the victim. And in order to achieve peace, somebody else needs to be brought to justice. That sort of thing, right? So the investigation leads you to the truth, and truth is power. That's kind of the basic structure of this.
I like that. So they're not. We keep speaking about rules, but they're not following any rules, even when it comes to the storyline. Like kind of the twist of the vampires not being the hunter, but the hunter is the hunter, the bad hunter, if that makes sense. So they're not following the actual formula of these type of genres, like the vampire genre, the demons and demon hunters and stuff. Like even like I said, even I mentioned with Sam and Dean's character, because like I said, one thing that I found interesting is when they actually both came faced with the woman in white. He didn't have no Bible, he had no cross, nothing. He just pulled out his gun and he started shooting, and then Sam just drove his car into the house. I was like, okay, this is interesting. Like it seems like they're gonna have to kind of like be very creative and be on the spot. Of course, 100% they're gonna have, they're gonna do their research, they're gonna do their investigation, but it felt like it felt like they're gonna tackle it as realistic as possible rather than supernatural, if that makes sense. But you did say that there are times where they do like exorcisms and stuff like that. They have religious weapons. They do. However, the way that they did fight against these things, it was very down to earth.
There are usually rules in this, but then there's often a twist to the rules. So, for example, with ghosts, you need to destroy their remains because the spirit is linked to their bones. And if you destroy the bones, the spirit becomes free. That's kind of the basic template of it. And they do that a few times, but if they did that every time, it would get boring. So they start adding twists to it. So, for example, what happens when somebody is cremated? It turns out the spirit can attach to something else. It can attach to an object that's really important to that person, for example. So it's never actually breaking the rules. It's often adding to it. So, for example, there is an episode later in the seasons where do you know the story about this blues singer who sold his soul to the devil for talent?
Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, so that appears in the show with the crossroads demon. So in the blues song, they talk about the demon at the crossroads, right? There's a type of demon in this called the crossroads demon, which you can summon, and you can essentially sell your soul to them, usually for 10 years of whatever it was you want. And these crossroads demons keep showing up throughout the show. And sometimes it's played straight, and sometimes it's subverted. So, for example, there's an episode in which people are dying and the Winchesters do their investigation. And it turns out that 10 years ago, 4 people sold their soul to a crossroads demon, and they each got something out of it. So there's like a person who became a world-renowned surgeon, and there's another, I think a musician maybe who got this talent for 10 years, and after 10 years the demon comes to collect, right? And so the Winchesters figure this out and say, okay, we need to destroy this demon in order to save these people so that their soul doesn't get collected and they don't go to hell, right? But then one of those four says, no, my wish 10 years ago was to cure my wife's cancer, and if I break my contract, my wife will get cancer again, and I'm not doing this. I'm going to hell for her, and don't you dare interfere with this.
Damn.
So, for example, there's another episode where there's a crossroads demon. Like the people who sold their soul to him keep dying early after 4 or 5 years. And it turns out that the demon has a henchman who wants to be useful. And so he starts killing his master's business partner so that he gets the souls early. The Winchester investigation leads to that. And kind of they expose it. And then the demon turns on his henchmen and say, you are destroying my reputation. Nobody will ever sell me their soul again. I'm going to destroy you now. Because if this gets out, nobody will ever make a bargain with me again. Right? So they turn the master on the henchman, and the actual villain was the henchman. So like that's what I mean by their twist. They add a twist to the rules, right? They never actually break it. You know, there's still like somebody's still selling their soul to the devil, right? Or a demon in this case. And there's like a few examples. There's many, many more. But that is kind of what I always liked about this, is that you never quite know what it ends up being, but you will never get cheated. There's never a gotcha. There's never we're just gonna pull out the rug from under you, and it's going to be something completely different. Like even the woman in white in the pilot, she's still a scorned woman looking for justice, and she still killed her children, and she goes after unfaithful men and all of that, right? But there's a twist. Like, but that basic characterization is never broken. Similarly, the crossroads demons are always honorable. They will exploit your weakness, but once you have a contract with them, you will get what you paid for, and in 10 years they will come to collect. So they will honor the terms of their contract, and it's humans who try to cheat. The reason why I like this show so much is that it takes these ideas, and these are all like folklore and mythology and religion and all of these, like it draws from all over world culture, right? And takes these ideas, and then it does something with it. Every time we talk about a mediocre horror movie that just does the basics, right? It's just a haunting, it's just a ghost, it's just an exorcism. I'm like, have you never seen an episode of Supernatural? Have you never thought one step beyond the basic formula? Can you not come up with a context or motivation or a twist that builds on this familiar idea, but is actually good and is actually a good story? Right? Like I could go on for 2 hours just quoting episodes where they do this, because they don't do it in every episode, right? There are some mediocre episodes in the show, specifically in the later seasons when they just keep going because of ratings and they've kind of told their story. But even then, a couple of times per season, they come up with a really cool story. But they never stop coming up with interesting twists to these familiar ideas. And because the familiar ideas, they are recognizable and relatable, and because of the twist, that keeps it fresh. And if you watch an episode, you never quite know how this is going to turn out. But it will all make sense in the end. And that is the promise that an episode of Supernatural makes. And it always keeps. I can't think of an episode where I just felt cheated, where I said, oh, this is just cheap. This is just a cop-out. This is just like, you promised me one thing, but you gave me something much lamer. It does not happen in the show, at least for me.
I definitely see where you're coming from. And it is good that they do that, in terms of adding that twist or adding an underlayer of a rule, for example. Or like, let's say, for example, there's an event, or like in a religious event, or like you said with the blues, for example, there's something else that they added onto it, like that little twist that just makes it more in that storyline more interesting. Because like most of the things that we get now is they pretty much just tell the story. They just tell that story, and there's not really much added to it. But obviously with Supernatural, like you just explained, that they've added like an underlayer of something which is clearly fiction, but it's interesting. It's interesting fiction. It adds to the story, so it's something that could be believable. So it's not something that's just outrageously added onto it just for the sake of it. It's like, okay, this addition to that storyline makes sense, as well as it being good. So I definitely do like that they've done that.
It always keeps one foot in things that you know. Right? Like you've heard the story about the demon at the crossroads. And so when you actually see one, it's familiar. Or you know things about like evil satanic cults, and those appear once or twice. But then it takes another step and another step. But it always keeps one foot in what you know. and stories you've heard and ideas you're familiar with. And for that reason, it feels a little bit real, right? Like, it has a believability to it. They take it into some wild places in some cases, but it always remains within earshot of stuff you've heard. And I think that is part of why it works.
Yes, it remains sane in a way, even though it's supernatural, but the idea remains sane, right? Like you said, believable, that's the main thing. It's good that this is an incorporation to just like the whole franchise. That's something that you do see throughout. So I'm like I said, I'm definitely more inclined now to watch this series. I am gonna watch episode 2 and see. I think I'm gonna give it more grace. I think I'm gonna have to give it more episodes than just episode 2 to see if I'm gonna fully like it. So I'm gonna try and watch how many episodes in season 1, sorry?
15.
Cool. I'm gonna watch season 1 because I don't think I'll be able to watch it in a few episodes and kind of see if this is for me or not. So season 1's good, right?
I would say it gets really good from episode 3. Like the pilot is the pilot, like it's good, but it's not firing on all cylinders yet. The second one is where they go into the wilderness to hunt up Wendigo, and that one is probably the least interesting one. After that, I think it gets much more interesting, and the characters start feeling like they're more themselves. And you start getting more details about what happened to the father and kind of the overarching plot and stuff like that. And by episode 4 or 5, like it's really like you're really in the middle of it, and it stays good for 5 seasons. Like if you just look at the 5 seasons that are the core story, it does not get bad. Like it does not run out of steam in season 4 or something like that. Like there's no bad season in this, at least in the main story. After that, it gets much more mixed, and there I would recommend like watching recommended episodes. But seasons 1 through 5 you can just watch. Like if you like the style of it, season 1 through 5 you can just watch like as one continuity, and it will absolutely work. Any other questions or remarks or comments about Supernatural, based on what I've said, based on what you saw in the pilot?
Not much. I think we've gone for everything. But like I said, this was just a pilot, so there's only so much that you can talk about the pilot. It's good that we kind of went through the storyline of the franchise as a whole. So yeah, I don't have anything to add because I think we've said everything. We've gone through everything. Unless there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, I've pretty much covered it. I like the last thing on my list is the soundtrack, like the 80s metal soundtrack. Like as they're driving down the highway, like on their way to their next adventure, to the next monster, and blasting Metallica and AC/DC. It's just iconic. Like once you've seen a few episodes, that just begins to feel right. And I'm not a music guy. I listen to very little music, but the soundtrack of this is top rate. All right. Any last words? Any last remarks on Supernatural to sum up?
I will say I definitely did see the moments in this pilot that gives off the vibe that it will become. I'm not gonna say it will because I don't know, but that it could become one of my favorite series. Who knows? I just like I said, I just need to give it grace and just go through season 1 and see if it's for me. But what I saw, like I said, I was 50-50 more positive, rather than negative. So I definitely liked the moments that I saw. I just need to get over what Daniel did say. He definitely does get better in terms of like, the relationship between the brothers and hopefully, just how they perform. Like I said, I'm just going to give it grace. But what I saw, I definitely enjoyed the moments that I did see. This talk has added more perspective and more insight, which I feel like I needed to start the supernatural journey of season 1. And then we see where it goes from after that.
Yeah, and let me know, like if you watch a few more episodes and how it holds up, because to me, like this show has been with me for almost 20 years. I didn't watch it right from the beginning, but somewhere around 2008 I started getting into it. I think I might have caught like an episode in like 2006, like in a hotel in the evening on the TV once, and so I thought this was pretty cool. Didn't think much of it. 2 years later I started watching it like on a streamer, or I bought a box set because it kind of looked cool. And I just never looked back. Like for almost 20 years, it's been with me. It's one of my all-time favorite shows. It also ruined most horror and fantasy movies for me because they tend to make mistakes, especially in how they handle their lore and how they handle their characters and how they handle like the metaphysics of it, like just the rules of how things work and what you can do with those rules, right? That those rules are not a straitjacket. They're not like an obstacle you have to overcome. These are actually your foundation that you build your story on. And then you can, like, once you respect the rules, you can add twists and exceptions to them. But if you always build on the familiar thing. It's just better. It holds together better. It makes more sense. It enables really good stories. The twists actually make sense. They don't come out of nowhere. It's just good. It just works. It makes for better stories. And if anybody wants to tell fantasy stories, horror stories, anything like this, watch Supernatural and see how they do it, because that is just how it's done. Like, I cannot think of a better example of how to use like these stories, folklore, mythology, all of these things, the paranormal even, to use these things to tell stories that are grounded in real characters and that have a humanity to them. There's just no better example as far as I'm concerned. That's why it's one of my favorites.
God damn, that was an amazing bitch. I'm definitely gonna have to check out season 1 now. Flipping, like, I cannot after hearing that. So cool.
And part of it is that like those rules are just something I really care about. Like, I really want stuff to matter in stories, and so if you set up rules like how ghosts work or how demons work, and then you just break those rules just out of convenience because you can't think of a way of making what you've already established make that work, I'm just not impressed. Like, it's your job as an author to use these rules to construct a scenario that puts characters into interesting places and that people can care about. And this show just does it correctly. And this is the number one thing I care about in stories with like a supernatural angle to them. And because this show focuses so much on it and gets it so right, it's my number one.
I feel like we should end off on there. That's a good way to end off today's episode. Guys, thank you very much for tuning into today's discussion.
So if you've made it this far into the conversation, if you liked what we've had to say, please tell a friend, because the algorithm doesn't like us. So we're looking for somebody who does. And if you hated what we've said, if you think it's all a bunch of nonsense, please tell an enemy.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. We will catch you next time. Au revoir.
Bye-bye.